Part 1, Chapter 1. Friday, April 1st, 0011 New Era, 20:57 hours. Richmond, Virginia, USA. The door to room 419 slid open. Scott Remington stood in the doorway, staring inside. So this was it. This was home. This was where they had decided home was, anyway. His hazel eyes swept the room as he took it in. It was smaller than his room at the academy. It was more cramped. There were metal bunks pushed up against the right wall. These were smaller, too. He sighed and rubbed his hand behind his neck. This was all wrong. He wasn't supposed to be there. They had asked him if he had a geographic preference, and he'd told them Detroit Station. He had gone to school at Michigan. That's where she was. That's where he was supposed to go. When they'd handed him his duty assignment and he saw that it was Richmond, he couldn't believe it. He scratched his head, fingertips disappearing under his tuft of soft brown hair. Scott was 5 feet and 11 inches tall, with a body as toned as one would expect from a soldier fresh out of Philadelphia Academy. He was a handsome young man, or at least she thought so, and her opinion was the only one that mattered. He sighed again and took a step inside. It was done. He was officially there. He slipped the duffel bag from his shoulder and plopped it on the floor. Turning around, he stepped back to the door and eased it shut with a quiet click. He scrutinized the room again. A sink was built into the wall in the far corner, complemented by a small cracked mirror. Moving to the faucet, he turned the knob and an instant rush of water and steam poured out. He slid his hands beneath the stream and massaged his face, then patted his sleeve against his forehead and eyes and turned the water off. Returning to his duffel bag, Scott crouched down and tugged open the metal zipper. Inside was a collection of folded clothes, on top of which sat a black leather-backed scripture, the name Scott James Remington inscribed in gold at the bottom right-hand corner. He passed his hand along the book's glossy surface.
God, what am I doing here?
He took hold of the book and rose to his feet, placing it atop the nightstand next to the bottom bunk. The next item from the bag was a worn-out football, stained with grass and dirt from recent use. He gripped it for a moment before rolling it beneath the bed. His gaze returned to the bag where it lingered for a moment. Her. As much of her as there could be, anyway. It was the picture of a blue-eyed, beautiful brunette. Her smile caused 2 dimples to appear just beyond her lips, and her snow-white teeth sparkled from within the gold boundaries of the frame. His gaze trailed to the lower right corner, where the words, "I love you," were scripted in black marker. Beneath it was her name, Nicole. His focus returned to her face, and he breathed in softly. He hated Richmond even more. He rose and set the picture atop his nightstand, her face angled to the bed. For the next half hour he removed clothes and unpacked the essentials. There was no hurry in the task, only the lull that came after the bustle of a move. As soon as he had finished, he turned off the lights and dropped down on the bottom bunk, sliding his hands behind his head. For the first time that day, his eyes fell shut. There was nothing more to do. Within minutes, he was asleep. The door swung open. A shaft of light cut in from the hallway, and Scott's eyes flickered awake. In the doorway stood the silhouette of a well-built man with a duffel bag similar to Scott's slung over his shoulder. His shoulders were broad, and though not massive, his stature made his power clear. Before Scott could gather his senses, the light flicked on, and the stranger stepped inside. He blinked as he saw Scott in bed.
Sorry about that. Didn't expect anyone else to be here yet.
Scott flinched as the room lit up, and he propped up on his elbows. He mumbled incoherently as the stranger tossed his duffel bag onto the floor and extended a hand.
Hey, David Jurgen.
David's features came into detail as Scott gave the hand an absent shake. Black hair was combed back on his head, and his casual green eyes made direct contact. Faint streaks of gray filtered past his sideburns. He offered Scott a genuine smile.
I'm your roommate. Our convoy just got in from Philadelphia. Guess yours must have come early. Sorry about waking you up.
Squinting at the clock on his nightstand, Scott said,
No, it's all right, man. What time is it?
4 past midnight.
Oh, wow.
David knelt next to his duffel bag and unzipped it. He smiled.
Yeah, the night's young.
He reached into the bag where he produced several pictures. He began to set them along the empty shelf space along the wall.
Guessing if you had stuff, it'd be out by now. Mind?
No, not at all.
Only one picture of Scott's mattered, and it was already in place.
What was your name again?
I'm sorry. I'm still a little...
Out of it, yeah. You look it.
Scott Remington.
Scott Remington, huh? Well, good to meet you.
Scott nodded as his gaze fell on the pictures. There were several family pictures, but the ones that stood out showed David in full police uniform. Other uniformed men stood around him.
You did police work?
14 years, NYPD.
Oh, wow. How...
David continued to set the photos in place.
I'm 40. Joined the department at 24. Did it for 14. Then enrolled in Philadelphia. The math works.
Scott lingered on the pictures.
Didn't see you at the academy.
Well, it is pretty big.
That's true.
And it was. In fact, the academy wasn't just pretty big. It was gargantuan. The only Eden bases that rivaled it were behemoths like Nagoya, Atlanta, and to an extent Novosibirsk, the 3 largest facilities on Earth.
We still probably had some of the same instructors, though.
Oh, I'm sure. You ever had Captain Williams?
Scott broke into a laugh. Captain Harold Williams, the man was a Philadelphia legend, a walking caricature of a drill sergeant.
Yeah, I think everybody had Captain Williams. You had him for hand-to-hand training, right?
More like cadet beatdown training. You ever win?
Killed me every time.
Yeah, same here.
David finished with the pictures and knelt beside his duffel bag.
So what about you? Where'd you come from?
Scott sat up, leaning against the lower bunk wall.
Lincoln, but I went to school at Michigan. I went to Philadelphia straight from there. Well, I didn't finish Michigan, left in my second year.
Lincoln...
Nebraska.
Why'd you leave school for this?
Scott hated that question. The answer always sounded stupid. He hesitated for a moment before responding.
I guess I kind of felt led here. To Eden, I mean.
What? Like a God thing?
That was as good as he could have described it.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Okay, I respect that. I'm going to take a walk around, learn the layout of the base some. Want to come?
Scott smiled. He was glad the conversation deviated from religion so quickly. It was an awkward topic to begin a partnership with.
It's past midnight on the first night of the most important career decision of my life. Might as well wander around.
He rose from his bunk. He wasn't tired now anyway, and the sooner he could get the base layout down, the better. There were few things more pathetic than the look of a lost rookie. The light to room 419 flicked off, and the 2 men stepped into the hallway. Richmond was the smallest of the major Eden facilities on Earth. It was the only one classified as a Class 1. There were 5 classes in all, and each one represented the number of enlisted operatives. 11 of the facilities were considered major: Eden Command, Atlanta, Nagoya, Novosibirsk, Philadelphia, Richmond, Berlin, Dublin, London, Leningrad, and Cairo. There were hundreds of smaller Eden establishments across the planet, but they rated more as corner stations than military compounds. Despite its size, Richmond brandished a reputation for professionalism, and it was held in high regard by its counterparts across the planet. As the 2 men trekked through Richmond's corridors, they found sparse activity. There were occasional clusters of operatives in places such as the training center, but for the most part the base felt asleep. With the traditional morning hours of Eden schedules, this was to be expected. The layout of the base was simple and effective, and within 45 minutes they managed to venture through almost every allowable area. It was much smaller than Philadelphia Academy. Conversation flowed as David unfolded his story to Scott. He was married to his wife of 12 years, Sharon. They had 2 boys, both in grade school in New York. David's stint with the NYPD was a proud one, and he left with honorable notice to enroll with Eden. Sharon and the kids still lived in New York, though they were in the stages of a transplant to the city of Richmond to be closer to him. In turn, Scott told him about Nicole. The clocks peaked at 0100 when they finally returned to their wing of the living quarters. The hallways were vacant, and a stark silence reverberated from the walls. Because of this tomb-like state, they were able to spot with ease the faint glow of a light down the hallway. It was the only sign of life they'd come across. As they drew nearer, they realized that it emanated from the room just beside theirs, room 421. The closer they drew, the more apparent it became that a man stood in the doorway of the room, his shadow silhouetted across the linoleum floor. Once their footsteps were within earshot, the silhouetted man tilted his head in their direction. He was slender, though height compensated for a lack of size. His arms were folded across his chest as he leaned against the doorway arch, and his shadowed gaze scrutinized them beneath a tuft of dusty brown hair.
Who's that?
No idea.
Hey there!
Startled, the stranger shifted bodily to face them. Everything about the motion was uncomfortable, and his body language immediately withdrew. His gaze darted down to the floor, and he mumbled a response.
Howdy.
He had to be from Texas. The insignia on his uniform identified him as an Alpha private, and David extended his hand.
David Jurgen. I live next door.
Scott offered his hand immediately after.
Scott Remington, good to meet you. We're in 419.
The stranger shook Scott's hand tentatively. His discomfort was impossible to ignore.
All right.
The stranger said in a low voice. He looked young, barely in his 20s, if at all. Averting his eyes, he again shied toward the doorway.
I'm Jaden Timmons.
Jaden Timmons?
Yes, sir.
No, we just got here today, too. Away with the sir.
Jaden's posture eased at the revelation.
Us too.
Who's us?
A new voice emerged from 421.
Hey, who's that you blathering with?
Scott and David exchanged a glance and then angled to the door. The accent was the first thing they heard.
Our neighbors.
Jaden answered the voice as he stepped to the side. Scott peered into the room. At the edge of the lower bunk sat a young man with an impish grin. His viridian gaze surveyed Scott beneath a scattered tangle of brown hair. As he kicked to his feet, one word came to Scott's mind. Energy.
Hi, Scott Remington. I live next door.
The newcomer slapped out a handshake.
How are you? Beacon McCrae. Likewise, it's a pleasure. You go by Remy.
Yeah, Remy works.
Remy actually worked well. A lot of his friends at Michigan called him that. It felt good to hear again.
Class, who you got with you?
David leaned inside and offered his hand.
David Jurgen. Good to meet you.
Beacon swatted David's palm.
Ye's muckers, eh?
We're roommates.
He could only assume that a mucker was a roommate, or a friend, or something along those lines.
Right, that's what I meant.
Despite the fact that Philadelphia was a melting pot for nationalities, the only Eden Academy on the planet, Scott had never met anyone from Ireland there. There were plenty of Americans, Britons, and Australians. The English speakers were undoubtedly the majority. Russia and Germany were also heavily represented, as were China and Japan. The rest of the global population, while still there, were far less common. David grinned.
Where are you from?
Broadford, Ireland. You really have to ask, do you?
Are you guys just in from Philadelphia, too?
We are. Guessing we're all alphas then, right?
Scott nodded as Jaden slipped back into the room. As soon as Beacon saw him, he said,
That's me boy O.J. He's a bit of a quiet one. He's one of them cowboys.
Jaden made for his bunk bed and snagged a brown cowboy hat from the bedstand. He placed it firmly on his head.
Jeez, a sniper he is.
You're a sniper?
Yeah.
That was impressive. He knew a few snipers in Philadelphia, and their training was to be envied. There was no such thing as a sniper with a poor work ethic.
Congratulations, man.
Thanks.
Meanwhile, Beacon's gaze shifted to David, where it lingered for several moments.
How old are ye?
Why?
You look older.
I'm 40.
That's why you look older.
How old are you?
A lot less old than you are.
Scott gave Beacon a hard stare. A question was lingering in his head, and he had to ask.
Why didn't you get stationed at Dublin?
That's a grand question. I've no bloody clue.
Scott laughed. Richmond didn't seem so far from home anymore.
And I thought being stationed outside of Michigan was bad. How does your family feel about this? They've got to be missing you like crazy.
I've got no family. Me Ma and me dad died years ago. We've got no brothers or sisters.
Scott was oddly relieved by Beacon's answer. Scott had lost his parents too, back when he was in high school. They died in a car accident. It was always comforting to find someone else who knew what it was like to lose parents at a young age. He felt an unspoken connection with them.
What about you now? Leave anyone back in the great state of Michigan?
A fiance and a brother. Mark lives in Nebraska, though.
Mark. He hadn't seen Mark in months. Scott was like a brother and father to him. Mark was still in his teens, but almost finished with high school. He planned to follow Scott's footsteps into Eden, no matter how hard Scott tried to talk him out of it.
So what about this girl?
Her name is Nicole. We've been together for 6 years. She came to Michigan with me. We dated in school, went to college together.
So you've been with this girl for 6 years, and you're not married yet?
We're engaged. Haven't really been able to set a date, though. I thought we'd be able to after the academy, but I didn't think they'd send me here. Believe me, nobody wants it to happen sooner than me.
A lot of people I knew in Philadelphia got married. Never understood that, I didn't. Get married in the middle of the academy. That place is hectic enough as it is.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I don't know how people had time to get hitched. Classes kept me busy around the clock.
It was an odd mix, Philadelphia. On one hand, it was military training. On the other, it was no different from college. In the midst of workouts, drills, and weapons training, there were courses. Classroom courses with names that sounded as if they came straight out of a university booklet. Geography 101, Urban Tactics, Environmental Combat 300. You didn't only graduate from the academy with a sense of accomplishment, you felt like you earned a college degree. Scott folded his arms contemplatively.
Do you guys feel like Philadelphia prepared you for this?
I think it did. I know a lot of people find it weird with the classes and everything, but everybody seems to come out alright.
It's different.
David stifled a yawn.
I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to create smarter operatives, and the best way to do that is through coursework combined with military training. It's a different system, yeah, but I think it works all right.
I bloody loved xenobiology.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Xenobiology alone made the academy worth it. There were few things more fascinating than the in-depth study of extraterrestrials. There were 3 alien species in all that had made contact with Earth: the Bachma, Ceratopians, and Ithini, and of course 2 animals in the Kanrasi and the Necrolid. It was startling how little Eden knew about each one outside of general biology. Their cultures, their relationships, and most notably their motives for attacking remained a mystery.
What was your favorite species?
I'd like to say necrolids, but really, that class just scared the hell out of me. I like learning about the Ceratopians, though.
Ceratopians, the brutes of the alien war, like a page out of the prehistoric. 5-horned, bone-frilled warriors. Walking terrors.
Ceratopian class was good. You're right about the necrolids, though they're pretty freaky. I think that's why people aren't as high on the class as you'd think, because as cool as they are, in the back of your mind you're thinking, Vec, I might have to fight that thing one day.
Yeah, exactly. Those things are scary as hell.
There was so much about the alien war that didn't make sense. In fact, there was next to nothing about it that made sense. 3 species appeared at almost the exact same time. The grotesque Bachma, the reptilian Ceratopians, and the quintessentially gray Ithini. The Bachma and the Ceratopians seemed to have nothing in common, except for one detail. They both worked with the Ithini. The Ithini were present with both species, except in seemingly mundane roles. It wasn't clear whether they were supervisors or servants, or something else. Then there were the Kanrasi and the Necrolid, non-sentient alien animals. The Kanrasi, bear-like, spider-eyed beasts, were used by both the Bachma and the Ceratopians, either as mounted rides or animal labor. Necrolids were only seen with the Ceratopians. That was just as well, as necrolids were generally regarded as the worst creatures imaginable. Black-skinned, sharp-clawed, long-fanged predators. Bugs with skin, with one horrible detail that stuck out from the rest. They were flesh-eaters. Why were the Ithini and Kanrasi connected to the Bachma and Ceratopians? Why weren't the Bachma and Ceratopians connected with one another? And why did only the Ceratopians use the Necrolid? They were all pertinent questions, but one question lingered above them. Why were they all after Earth? They appeared and attacked at the same time, within months of each other, without a clue as to their motives. Some media reporters nicknamed the alien war the Race for Earth, but nobody knew what was waiting at the finish line. Why were they here? It was a simple question, without a single answer. David pushed up from his chair. The other men turned to stare at him.
What's up?
Nothing. I think I'm just about to turn in is all. I'm feeling that move from Philadelphia now.
Old people just get tired early.
David gave him a withering look, but the Irishman just laughed.
Fair enough, then. It was grand meeting you.
Scott sighed and lowered his head. Then he, too, stood up from his prop against the wall.
That's probably a good idea. Tomorrow's going to come fast.
You going to bed too, then?
I don't want to be head-bobbing for whatever we have in the works tomorrow. I'm pretty sure that doesn't make a good first impression.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm sure we'll see us both tomorrow, then.
There's a good chance we'll all be in the same unit. They usually group teammates close together in the living quarters, and we're in the very next room.
That's true.
I guess we'll find out tomorrow.
Yeah.
Beacon plopped back down on his bunk and flung up a wave.
Night, Remy. Night, Dave.
Good night, guys.
Scott and David bid their farewells, stepped into the hall, and closed the door to 421.
Nice guys.
They seemed rather an odd couple, but he'd found them both friendly, in their own ways.
Yeah, unique little job of pairing Eden did there.
Yeah, really.
The door to 419 opened and they stepped inside. For the next several minutes they prepared for the night. They took turns brushing their teeth at the sink, and then they slipped out of their jerseys and into nightwear. David climbed to the upper bunk as Scott flicked the light off from below.
Do you really think there's a chance we'll all be in the same unit?
I think there is.
I hope so. That'd be fun.
He closed his eyes. Silence hung in the room for several moments before David spoke.
Right. Because you know, Eden stands for Earth's Daily Entertainment Network.
Haha. Whatever. Good night. Earth's Daily Entertainment Network. I don't even know what that means.
Maybe you will soon. Good night.
Scott pulled the covers to his chin and turned over on his side. The initial uneasiness he'd felt had simmered down in his system. At least he had other people to share it with now. He looked forward to seeing Beacon and Jaden again. His mouth stretched open in a yawn, and he once again slid his eyes shut. Within minutes, he was asleep.